Hi, my name is Katie, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the rest of the books I read in January. So, by now, I should have posted my wrap up of all the Japanese books I read, and this video is going to be all the other books. So, I'm a real mood reader, and sometimes I'm just drawn by mood to certain titles, and that's what's happened with a lot of these. One of them I did for a vlog, like there's a wee group of them that I did for a vlog, and the rest are just mood reads and things I picked up along the way throughout the month. So, without further ado, let's just start. So the first book I read that's in this category was called German Calendar No December, and it was by Sylvia Ofili. And it's about the author, it's like a graphic novel about the author growing up in Nigeria and moving from one town to the other for boarding school. And then it follows her journey after boarding school as she moves abroad to Germany. It's really quite interesting, I would say. Like it's not a perspective that I see in graphic novel format very often, so I really like that. And I really enjoyed like connecting with the kind of themes, especially when the author moves to Germany. So it's like a coming of age narrative, but then it sort of becomes more about immigration and refugees and belonging and identity and culture and all of these themes that I love. And so that was when the book really came into its own for me. I would say that the pacing for me was slightly off and I found it like a little bit detached, I would say. But yeah, I did still like it and I really liked the art style. It was lovely. And so I'm glad I read it. I then read Memoirs of a Wedding Planner by Tolup Popula. And this was like flash fiction set in Lagos in Nigeria, and it's basically, as it says in the tin, little stories about wedding planning. And they were okay, I guess, is all I can really say about them. I also DNF'd a different flash fiction collection, and I'm maybe thinking that flash fiction isn't for me. I think it's a little bit too short to really get into anything. And like for me, a lot of these felt like one after the other, they kind of repeat themselves in format and style and like a wee bit different themes, but mostly the same. Like by the sort of third and fourth one, I was like, okay, I know what's going to happen. This was going to happen, and occasionally she still did take me by surprise. But yeah, it wasn't quite what I was. I was hoping for more because I was really liking short fiction this month, and I was hoping for a little bit more from it than what I got, but maybe that's just me. I still liked it. I think I gave it 3 stars, so it's not that I disliked it, but I just felt like a little bit like I was left a bit wanting for the story to be fleshed out and to like learn more about each of the characters and things. So yeah, I would probably read more from this author, but maybe in a longer format. I then read A Portable Shelter by Kirsty Logan, and this is a collection of stories, I suppose, and it's 2 women who are expecting a baby and they are talking to their baby and connecting with the baby and sharing stories from their life with the baby. And I was really excited about this. I actually put this on my like journal list of books to read in 2021. I just thought it sounded delightful, like so lovely. I thought it would be comforting and cozy and lovely and just like heartwarming, and I was really looking forward to it, and it just did not fall, like it fell completely flat. It didn't work for me at all, and I think that's because of my expectation. So I assumed that because they're speaking to children, they would be like sweet wholesome stories or like child friendly stories, and they're just not. Like they're actually quite dark in places, quite graphic. There's a lot of content warnings for this, which I was not expecting, and so that like hindered my enjoyment personally, just because I'd gone in with a different expectation. If you go into this expecting something a little bit darker, then you might love it, and if you like darker themes in books, then you might love this. But it just wasn't what I was expecting, I guess. I will say, expectations aside, I didn't really like Kirsty Logan's writing style. I thought it was a little bit disjointed and clunky in places, and I especially didn't like her use of Scots, which is unusual for me. I usually like reading Scots language stuff, but I felt like Kirsty Logan didn't really use the language correctly. I don't know if that's really outrageous to say, but there are certain times where she uses words and the word doesn't make sense in that context. I also hoped for more like relationship building. Like, I wanted to see the mothers connect with the child. I wanted to watch that grow and develop, and that was just totally missing for me from this book. There's really very little of that until like right at the end, and it was like too little too late for me by that point. So yeah, it was what it was, and it will be for someone. There's definitely read out there for this. I would consider going back to Kirsty Logan as well, because I do think this is quite a few years old, and so people's styles and people's writing develops over time, and I would be curious to give Kirsty Logan's collection called Things We Say in the Dark a go, because I have heard good things about that, and I'm curious to read that around about the time of Halloween, just because I think it's like kind of themed around kind of that kind of stories, and I think I'll go into that with a different expectation and hopefully come out of it with a better reaction, but we'll see. The good news is that I followed that up with one of my favourite reads of the year so far, and that is My Name is Leon by Kit Duval, and I really loved this book. I was not expecting to love it because it's told from the perspective of a child, and I generally don't like child narrators, but I totally love Leon. He's just the sweetest little kid ever. So to tell you what it's about, this book is set in 1980s England, and it's about Leon, who cares for his mum, who has substance issues and mental health issues, and is really just struggling, and she's just given birth to Leon's little brother Jake, and so Leon's in charge of looking after mum and Jake, and it's a lot. He's only 9, and it's a lot to handle. And one day he wakes up, he's been feeding wee baby Jake, and he's been changing his nappy. One day he wakes up and there's no food in the house, and mum is not responsive. So Leon has no choice. He goes upstairs to get his neighbour and tell them what's happened. And this sparks an ambulance and social services and all of that. And Leon is taken into care. And so it's from there, it's kind of charting his foster care journey, and he goes to live with a lovely older lady called Maureen, and she's just so lovely. And I cried multiple times, I'm not gonna lie. Not many books make me cry. Like, I think last year 2 books out of the 130 or something I read, 2 of them had made me cry, and this was one that made me cry right off the bat this year. So I was surprised by that, but I loved it, and the fact that the author can evoke such emotion in me, I think, is always a true test of like how well they write characters, and how well that I'm sucked into a book, that I can fully feel everything the character's feeling. And so I did really rate that. What was interesting in this book as well is like the 1980s UK political atmosphere, to me, felt like another character in a book. Like, it was so powerful and so like it totally drew me in. Sorry, I was interrupted there by a technical difficulty, so hopefully the angle hasn't changed too much. But I was saying, My Name is Leon. The political atmosphere felt like another character in the book for me. It was so evocative and powerful and atmospheric, and really well written. What I struggle with sometimes is Leon's point of view. Sometimes he seems quite mature, and at other points he seems very childlike. When I posted that in my review on Instagram, one of my friends, Rosie, reached out and says that that's quite common of children who've experienced trauma in the care system, and I found that really interesting, that the maturity level can change quite dramatically in how they perceive the world, etc., which I hadn't really thought of or given grace for in this book. So, but Kit Duval has worked in social work herself, so she will know what that is like. And so, yeah, I rated this 5 stars or 4 stars, I can't remember, and just really loved it. What I will say is really strange is it's set in 1980s, right? But you wouldn't necessarily know that. Like, this could have been written about things happening today. And that's what's most like upsetting, I suppose, about reading this book. So some things have changed a lot. For instance, they were using telephone boxes, and you could go to the shop and you could get more than one sweet for 10 pence, or things that change over time naturally. But then other things like institutionalised racism, Tory government policies, political unrest, these things never really seem to have changed all those years later, 30 plus years later. And so much is still the same, and that was what was really hard in reading this book, I found. But I would really recommend it, and already I feel like it's going to be a favourite of mine. I really, really liked it. and looking forward to reading more from this author. I then listened to a collection of stories which were edited by S.K. Ali and Aisha Saeed, and they were called Once Upon an Eid, and they are about young Muslim people celebrating Eid. And they were just so pure and wholesome and lovely. And I think the tagline is something like stories to bring you comfort and joy, and they just do that, like they deliver. It was so lovely. I listened to them usually on my walks, like round about the town, and they were just, every single time I was listening I was like, this is just such a nice story. There were some stories in particular that stood out to me. There was one about a little boy who was making brownies for Eid, and there was another about a young girl who was trying to keep up with her friends, I guess, in terms of the amount of money she could spend on Eid dress, and the struggles that she faced, and kind of like the shame of not feeling like you have the same amount of money as your peers. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of like class and things like that. It's just very subtle though, you know, and I really feel like this would be good for like younger readers, especially like middle grade maybe, but as an adult I still got so much comfort and joy. And I just found it so lovely, and there are so many authors in there that I now want to read more from, so that was the best thing about it for me. And now 4 of the next 5 you will maybe have seen me talk about if you watch my reading vlog, where I read like the Icelandic weather. So the Icelandic weather, choosing my TBR. I'll link it up above or down below, whichever I managed to figure out. But I started a reading vlog, and the first book I read was Open House by Katie Seiss. I kept calling her Kate in the vlog, and after watching it back I thought, oh my goodness. But I didn't really like this. It was a thriller, and it was about a young woman who goes missing, and then 10 years later the family's trying to work out what's happened, and there's a clue that there's a piece of evidence that arises which re-sparks the investigation. We have 3 points of view, and I think what was frustrating for me was basically that so much of it felt underdeveloped and like surface level, and ultimately I just felt like the twist, like the end twist, which is like the big reveal in thrillers, was like disappointing. Like I had already guessed it, and that to me is not what I look for in a thriller. I want something that I've not guessed, like I'm like totally taken by surprise by. I like that, so that was disappointing. I rated it 2 stars. Okay, and the next one I want to talk about is called Brown Baby, and it's by Nikesh Shukla, and it's a memoir that he writes to his daughters, who are I think 3 and 6 or something, and it's about the lessons he wants them to learn, and I thought this was okay. I had really high expectations, and I would say for the first 40% or so, this book met them. Like I was really loving it, and I thought this could be a 5-star read. And then there were a few chapters where I felt like the structure needed more work. So like some things were in certain sections that I felt should have been in others. And the section about sleep was like really meandering. His writing just goes off on a total tangent a lot. And I felt like, what are you trying to say here? And is this particularly an anecdote that your kid wants to know about? And I felt in general like his wife was very absent from the narrative, which I found strange personally. And I would have liked to have like seen more of his wife, I guess. So I was kind of disappointed in that. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. I spoke about it at quite a bit of length in the vlog. It was fine. I gave it 3 stars. It just wasn't the 5-star read I had hoped it would be, which was disappointing. And I did feel like it needed more editorial time and more time to let the emotions kind of grow and change and develop over time. I felt like it was all kind of written in the moment, about things that in 5 or 10 years' time you have a different perspective on. And I think 5 or 10 years' time would have been a more interesting perspective as an outsider. But this book wasn't written for me, it's written for his daughters, so it feels strange to critique it in a sense, but that was just my feelings as a reader, an outside person reading this. So yeah, that was what it was. And now between the reading of this vlog, I actually read a little novella, and it was Nick and Charlie by Alice Osman. And this is it's part of the Saltaire series, and it's linked to the Heartstopper series, graphic novels, but this is like a story novella. And I listened to an audiobook, and I really liked it. I thought it was lovely and sweet. and it kind of brought the characters to life. I was kind of kicking myself because I didn't realise that there are actually 3 pieces in the Solitaire series, and I read the last one, so I've kind of spoiled that series for myself. But still, I enjoyed it as a sort of standalone novella, visiting Charlie and Nick 2 years after the Heartstopper series, and I felt like it really captured like that kind of young relationship thing, and like the outside influences, how they can have impact on people, and things like that, which is rare. I see that, I suppose, in fiction, and I thought that was well captured here, so I did like it. I also then read for the vlog The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, and now I read a special edition of this, and it had photography by Steve Shapiro, and it's a monster edition, you can tell by the sizing, but it was so beautiful, so moving. The photography is just perfection, and James Baldwin's writing, as ever, is fantastic. So I absolutely love this. I gave it 5 stars, and I said in the vlog, and I'll say again here, if you'd be interested in reading this and seeing the photography, etc., and learning more about 1960s America, about race relations in America, the history, the civil rights movement, etc., and you want to kind of add to that with some photography and some writing from the time, I would recommend this, and I would suggest getting it from your library, and if your library doesn't have a copy, requesting it, because I feel like it's the kind of book that lots of people would benefit from reading, and if you request it for your library, more people will get a chance to read it, sort of thing. So I got this from my library, and I'm very glad to. So yeah. I thought that was an earthquake. It's the washing machine. Oh my goodness. So the final book that I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to talk about it briefly because I have a full review of this book going up on my channel hopefully next week, and that's Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers, and this is a sweet female romance book about a girl who graduates with a doctorate in astronomy and then goes to Vegas for like a once-off party kind of thing, and ends up getting married, and it's about how she comes to terms with the fact that she's married, she's done something totally out of character, and also how the relationship with the wife kind of goes, so how they connect and how that kind of blossoms. And it is like quite a slow paced, slow burn romance in that sense, although there is an insta love element because they have got drunk and decided to get married, and obviously they really attracted to each other, sort of thing. But overall their actual story arc is quite slow burn, I felt, and the pacing of the book is quite slow as well, which I quite liked. I gave this book 4 stars. I think it really captures a lot about mental illness. It captures a lot about like the feelings of coming of age at an older stage in your life, like 29, my main character is, and I think it just kind of is quite an original piece. Like I've not read anything really like it. The only thing I could think of that was similar was Let's Talk About Love by Claire Can, and that's because the main character in that is kind of coming to terms with herself, coming of age kind of story again, and there is a mental illness element of it and positive therapy rep in both, which I thought was absolutely fabulous. So those were kind of the only comparisons I had personally. But I would say that Honey Girl is kind of it feels older in its themes, and more mature in its themes. So if you liked one or the other, keep that in mind, kind of thing. So yeah, overall I would say I had quite a mixed reading month. I had like 5 star, I've basically had every single star rating in 1 month, so it's quite a varied way to start the year. My favourites so far of this lot that I've talked about in this video, and do check out my Japanese literature video if you're interested in that, but my favourites of this section were definitely The Fire Next Time, with the photography from Steve Shapiro and writing from James Baldwin. I thought this was brilliant, really moving. Also Honey Girl, which I've just mentioned, and My Name is Leon, 2 great pieces of fiction. Would definitely wholeheartedly recommend them. And then if you're looking for a bit of joy and a bit of comfort and something a little bit sweeter and like pure, I guess, then I would say definitely go for Once Upon an Eid, and you could try the Nick and Charlie series. If you haven't read the Heartstopper graphic novels, I would recommend starting there, and then you could probably enjoy the Solitaire in its totality from start to finish and not just skip to book number 3 like me. But yeah, it's been a good reading month. I would be interested to hear if you read any of these books, what you thought of them and how your reading month went. Did you read anything good? Anything you'd recommend to me based on what I thought of these books? And yeah, Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.